Hi, this is Scott from Specter Gear, and for today's video we're going to be talking once again about the Ruger Mini-14 carbine. This is the second video in my series on the Mini-14, so we're still kind of in that intro phase. And I thought before we get into more topic or detail-specific videos, I thought it best first to kind of talk about my personal carbine setup, and it'll give you kind of an idea of where, or the perspective in which I'm going to be talking about Mini-14s going forward. But this is my current setup for the Mini-14 carbine. This also happens to be kind of my default go-to defensive carbine for a number of reasons that I'll talk about again in a separate video, but none of which I feel particularly hampered by. So this particular Mini-14 is a Mini-14 that I picked up in the mid-1990s. It's, I believe, the third Mini-14 that I owned, and it's one that I've been shooting for many years now. It's been dependable, reliable, just a fantastic little gun, and like I said, it's my go-to defensive carbine. I keep two long guns ready at all times in my house, and this is one of them, the other being a shotgun. And that one I tend to waffle back and forth on, but I invariably go to the Mini-14 for all of my carbine needs in my household. This is a 186 series gun. The current Mini-14s are called 581s. It's serial range 580, or starts 581 and then later. So like I said, this is the older design. Now, there were some elements of the older design that were obviously in need of improvement. So as I go through this, I'm going to talk about kind of in series of introduction the mods that I've done over the years. Now, of course, the first thing really that I modified was the stock, and this is the fourth stock that this has been in. Of course, it originally came with a wood stock, and it had that kind of deep C cut at the rear. It was an awful stock, absolutely horrible. So right away I upgraded that, and I believe I went to, I think it was a Butler Creek stock. And then after that I played around with the Hogue overmolded stock, and the problem that I had with the Hogue overmolded stock was I could never get it to fit on this gun, ever. I ended up having to send it back. There was something about the ferrule at the front of the stock. It would not seat into the gun. It just absolutely would not under any circumstances go in there. So really I can't give too much of an assessment on that stock because it never actually worked for me at all. And then of course the fourth stock is the Ruger factory synthetic stock. And I'm going to be honest with you, when it comes to stocks, this is perfect for, well, almost perfect. It's 98%. If it had a couple of little pieces of rail at the front on either side, it would then be perfect. But beyond that, as far as the length of pull on the stock, everything about it just works for me. So I'm very happy with the stock, and I have no intent to change to anything else. The next modification that I did, and probably the most significant modification, was to the rear sight. Now, the original factory rear sight on the base model Mini-14, not the ranch rifle, but the base model. I believe that's actually a lot of the reason why the Mini-14 developed a reputation for inaccuracy. Now, people would talk about barrel whip, and I'll get into that and whether or not that is or is not a thing. But I believe the main problem for most people that they were having was with that rear sight. Now, the rear sight itself would not, the adjustments are very crude. They were difficult to carry out. The aperture for the rear sight, it was just basically a piece of stamped sheet metal with a hole drilled through it, and a small hole at that. And the rear sight itself, if you were to grab it, at least on mine, I could get a little bit of deflection back and forth to as much as about 1/16 of an inch in each direction. That does not contribute to decent accuracy. When you have a gun that's vibrating and moving under recoil, if your rear sight is shifting in its base, you're going to be all over the place. So a very worthy upgrade that I did was going to the Tech sight. When TechSight came out with this sighting system for the Mini-14, I jumped on this right away. It is very well made. It's very durable. It's well protected. It's solid. The adjustments are familiar to anyone that's made sight adjustments to M16s, or rather M14s or M1As. It's very, very similar to an M1A rear sight, although you do not have elevation, or I'm sorry, you do have elevation, but it's not in the conventional sense of an M14 sight where you have windage on one side, elevation on the other. Your elevation adjustment is actually done with this little dial right here, and I'll actually do a separate video completely on the tech sights and dig a little bit deeper into that. But this is an excellent rear sight, and if you have an older model Mini-14, this definitely is something you might want to consider as an upgrade. Now, moving on from that, internally, I don't really have anything. I've made no modifications to the inside of the gun. Everything is bone stock, with the exception of I have a shock buff, little recoil buffer on the recoil system, and that's just to keep from beating the frame of the gun up. Now, front sight, no modification there. I've stayed with the standard front sight. It's not protected by wings or anything like that, but it's a very robust, rugged front sight. I've actually never seen a stock Mini-14 sight damaged in any way. I'm sure somebody's done it at some point, but it's not a failure point that I see. Like I said, it's pretty darn durable. Now, you notice there's no what I would call muzzle adornment. And there's a very important reason for that. Some people will put a muzzle brake on these in restricted states. Now, if I was not in a restricted state and there was no assault weapons ban, I'd probably have a flash suppressor on this. But because I do live in a restricted state, my only option would be to go with something like a muzzle brake, which doesn't eliminate flash. And I guess it'll reduce recoil a little bit, but the Mini-14, look, if a Mini-14 is pushing you around to the degree that you can't control the gun, maybe you need to go to a smaller gun. The muzzle brake, I've never seen an advantage on a 5.56 millimeter gun, at least for me. There's just no difference. All it really does in actuality is it makes the gun a hell of a lot noisier, and the problem for me would be in a restricted state. I don't really want to get into who's right or who's wrong debate with law enforcement over something on the end of my gun. If some rookie cop thinks that that's a flash suppressor, I'm going to jail. Now, I'll get out of jail eventually, and I'll win my case in court, but in the meantime, it's really disrupted my life. I just go with a bald muzzle, and then it's just never an issue. So that's me. You do whatever the heck you want to do. Now, I guess the last modification that that's probably drawn everybody's eye already, and I've kind of saved this for the end, and I'll talk accessories in just a moment, but the Amiga Ranges Handguard rail package. I don't have any optics on here, and that's the first thing you're going to know. Well, you got all this rail space. Why don't you have all kinds of crap stacked up on there? I'm still kind of testing on optics. When it comes to things like red dots, I'm conditioned by virtue of my training to be an iron sight guy. I'm so conditioned to go for that iron sight picture that when I ever try to use a red dot, it slows me down. It's actually not faster, it's slower. Now, I'm sure at some point I could train myself out of that, but the problem is then I've got to be able to toggle between sighting systems on all my weapons platforms. So it's either all red dots or all iron sight. The half measure stuff of, what sighting system am I playing with? Is it on or off? Which sight is this in the first place? To be honest with you, I'm a little long in the tooth, and I get along just fine with iron sights, so I'm kind of cool with that. But I'm open-minded, and I'm willing to try new stuff. But to be honest with you, really what I'm probably going to end up mounting on this is a low-power optic like a scout scope. And even then, I don't know. Again, for a defensive carbine, and I'll talk later about one of the main virtues of this gun is that it's light and it's handy and it throws to the shoulder. And the second I put something on the gun, it begins to diminish that. So unless I actually really need it, I may never actually run an optic on this. I'm not 100% on that, so that may change. I reserve the right to change my mind. How about that? The main reason I have this, to be honest with you, is I wanted a more effective means of connecting the sling at the front of the gun, and I wanted to be able to mount a light on it. That's pretty much it, actually. Now, of course, I could have achieved this just by putting some rail pieces on each side of the stock. And I have another stock that I have set aside, and I've got a couple of rail sections, and I may actually go ahead and build that stock out and then go back to a standard handguard on this. So don't be surprised if you see me doing that. But when it comes to a hard sling mount point, of course, Specter Gear manufactures the slings for Mini-14s, and they have the wraparound front adapter, and it works. It works pretty darn good. But I will be the first to admit that the best and most effective way to mount a sling to a gun is with a hard mount. It always is and always will be. And that's why we sell hard mounts to go with our slings if you elect to go in that direction. So I wanted this, and I wanted the ability to mount a light almost exactly right where it's at right now. I like this, I guess you call 1 or 2:30 or 2 o'clock position, and I'll talk more about that in a separate video as to why having your light mounted up in this arrangement versus under a barrel is a better idea. But again, subject for another video. But that's pretty much all that's been done to the gun itself. When it comes to the sling, my kind of favorite go-to sling right at the moment is the Raptor 2-point sling. On the Mini-14, it works exceptionally well. It's probably, and of course, you know, I've designed the sling, so I've tried every single possible sling combination on this, and hands down, the best so far for me has been the Raptor 2-point sling. And of course, we offer that in the 2 different configurations, the one with the wraparound front adapter, and of course, we make one with a hook to go with this Amiga Ranges mount. And just remember, on the Amiga Ranges mount, this is a separate piece. Actually, the rail section and the sling mount plate are both add-on pieces that you have to buy along with the rail, so keep that in mind if you're buying an Amiga Ranges rail. It mounts at the rear, of course, with a stirrup rear adapter, but most importantly, and probably my most important piece of kit on this gun, is going to be the buttstock magazine pouch. As I mentioned, this is my go-to defensive carbine for my household. So if I grab this gun, I have 1 fully loaded magazine locked into the weapon, and I have 1 fully loaded magazine on the buttstock of the weapon. So that's 40 rounds of 5.56 with a tack light and a sling. I've got pretty much most of what I need to handle most domestic United States problems. I do have a little bag that I throw over the shoulder that has additional magazines, first aid kit, flashlights. It's got a number of things in it. But if all I had time to grab was just the gun and to go, this is a pretty adequate setup for me. I have no problems with this whatsoever. It's going to get the job done. So that's kind of my Mini-14 carbine and my current setup. The next video I do, I'll probably talk kind of about how my history with the Mini-14 and some of the things that over the years have led me to the conclusion that this is a good gun for me. This is something that works for what I do. And I'll talk about other things, you know, the obvious stuff as to, you know, why the Mini-14 would be extra popular nowadays, particularly in restricted states. And then we'll talk about the history and design and development, different variations, different upgrades that you can do, magazines. I mean, I've got a ton of Mini-14 data to go through, and I've got it kind of laid out in some kind of order at this point. So I'll probably be putting one of these videos out at least once a week going forward. So with that, I'll bring it to a close. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day. This is Scott at Specter Gear. And if you're interested in any of these products that I talked about, particularly the sling and the buttstock magazine pouch, I'll leave links in the description. And of course, you can visit us at spectergear.com anytime you want. So with that, have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Take it easy.